Hello and welcome to the annual II Graduate Student Lightning Talks. I would like to give a special welcome to our prospective students joining us today as part of the MIRS preview days. It's my hope that this event offers you an inside look at what students actually do as part of our programs and helps to illustrate the breadth of experiences across MIRS and the International Institute. My name is Per Kassel. I'm an historian of modern China and the Director of Graduate Studies in the LSNA International Institute. I've interacted with the students in today's panel, either in my capacity as an academic advisor and director of the MIRS program, or both. I'm very impressed by the work they've done on their capstone projects. In addition to our visiting students, I'd like to thank the faculty and students from the various II centers who are here to show support for our students and colleagues. One of the strengths of MIRS is the opportunity to grow connections and collaborations across the II, and your participation in events like this are a significant part of how we accomplish this. We have 5 exceptional students eager to share about the research and educational journeys, but first I would like to go over a few housekeeping points. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be shared via the II's YouTube page. I ask the attendees to keep your microphones muted throughout today's program to minimize any disruptions for our presenters. After each speaker, we will have time for you to ask questions. Feel free to write your question in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll address them at once. Or, if you prefer, once we start the Q&A, I will invite you to use the raise your hand feature, and we'll call on people to ask your questions directly to the presenter. With that, I think we're ready to move to the main event, our student speakers. Our first speaker this morning is Caity Marentette. Caity is a first-year student in the MIRS South Asian Studies specialization. Her research interests include literary production, performance and circulation, critical theory, and devotional literature in the Indo-Gangetic Plain. She is a recipient of multiple MIRS and CSIA fellowships, including academic year and summer floss. Please join me in welcoming Caity for her talk titled Everyday Circulations, Bengali Short Story Magazines in the Mid-20th Century.
Thank you, Per, for such a generous introduction. Yes, as he said, that I am a first-year MIRS student in the South Asian Studies concentration, and I am one of the students who will be taking kind of the thesis route of this program. My thesis is tentatively titled Ink and Identity, Language Metamorphoses, Literature, and Feeling in Mid-20th Century Kolkata. So if I could go to the next slide, please. So the mid-20th century across the world saw a proliferation of various literary movements, especially in the decolonizing and kind of the decolonizing part of the world in the Cold War context. However, a vast majority of the literature which currently exists focuses on the United States and the Western world and these literary movements. So to help give a sense for the grounds upon which these literary movements took off, specifically in the city Kolkata, I think it warrants illustrating what the historical and geopolitical precursors to these movements were. So I provided just a few examples here to help show kind of the ways that Kolkata was uniquely situated as a site of social reorganization, thinking about kind of the 1947 partition and the Cold War context, but also geopolitical participation on local levels as well as national and international levels. Also bear in mind that Kolkata, which is situated in West Bengal in eastern India, is only 4 hours away by vehicle or by train to the nearest national border next to modern-day Bangladesh, which makes the proximity to the partition lines relatively close. If we could move on to the next slide. So I've provided here just a few more important events which kind of shaped this era that I'm looking at, which is to say roughly in 1950s to 1970s Bengal, including kind of the post-partition displacement crisis. So after partition, there were millions of refugees who were fleeing across the border from India into what was at the time East Pakistan, East Pakistan into India, vice versa. And this created a displacement crisis that led to mass overwhelm, particularly in refugee camps, as well as the 1964 Bengal riots, which primarily took place in modern-day Bangladesh, in East Pakistan at the time, and the 1971 Mukti Jodho, the Liberation War in Bangladesh, and the concurrent Indo-Pakistan War. So the next thing that I kind of want to discuss that kind of set the scene for these magazines is the series of literary movements which led to the specific kind of flavor that these magazines took on, which is to say, this movement stems out of the Bengali literary, the Bengali Renaissance, which gave way to a series of various literary transformations in tandem with various historical and political shifts that can be observed in the late 19th and early to mid 20th centuries. So already has the Renaissance movement introduced various kinds of literary styles and genres in the Bengali literary corpus, most notable among them being the introduction of the novel and the generation of kind of the short story format, both of which were kind of adapted from Victorian literature, or rather cross-communicated using Victorian literature as a kind of continuation of a previously extant orally transmitted folklore genre. So this goes to say that the Bengali novel and the short story format are actually continuations of these kinds of folkloric genres which have existed for centuries and millennia prior. In particular, this kind of literary renaissance, which occurred in the late 19th century, practiced this kind of format of Victorian realism, which is to say an exploration of kind of the quotidian, the everyday, an examination of things which occur in the everyday in kind of this social and political reorganization, which occurs in tandem with the British Raj. So instead of the kind of literary realism that was practiced by the writers of the Bengal Renaissance and the Western Victorian era authors, modernist writing from the period of the Progressive Writers Association in the 1930s, at the onset of kind of these partition talks, exercises social realism, which is to say kind of this writing which explores the socio-political realities in which people were kind of, finding themselves in, and then a subsequent kind of critique of those social conditions. And then the movements of the 1950s and 60s brought in with them kind of this intense awareness to class privilege and to geopolitical frustrations, which grew out from the Progressive Writers Association period in the 1930s and 40s. This was also coupled alongside, kind of loud political frustrations that often surfaced through literary experimentation. And this is the period that I'm most interested in, is this period of 1950s to 70s literary modernism. If we can move on to the next slide. So in particular, one of the things that I'm really interested in here is exploring these literary genres as a part of the everyday. And I've provided just a couple examples here, what I mean by the everyday. So the way that I evaluate these short stories and the way that short stories often present themselves is as ephemeral objects, as ephemera, produced on what are typically kind of, poor quality materials or really cheap papers, which were intended not to last, perhaps, due to budgetary constraints, but also as kind of used as kind of a transitory marker of the times. The idea was to present the moment as it was, and to voice, frustrations of the moment as it was kind of occurring on the grounds. Alongside that, these kinds of everyday magazines, these short story magazines that you see between the 1950s and 1970s, oftentimes have very limited prints and short periods of circulation. usually there were fewer than 1,000 copies in circulation at any given point in time. As I mentioned earlier, an extension of the folkloric literary tradition. And this characterization of the everyday is, I think, what merits their study in particular. If we can move on to the next page. So here are a couple of reasons why I think it's particularly significant to study these short story magazines. But I just want to introduce kind of my own scholarly intervention here, which is to say I'm interested in reading into the ways that emotional expression can be ascertained and further studied by essentially studying against the grain. So there's the psychoanalytics or the scholar of psychoanalysis. Freud refers to this concept of second censorship, which is utilized by some post-structural scholars, especially Jacques Derrida, to explain the ways that emotions can never truly be suppressed, and rather a suppressed emotion will resurface in another emotion or action, oftentimes in unexpected ways. And I think in particular, it's through this kind of everyday genre that you can see kinds of these explicit expressions of or explicit emotional expressions through kind of colloquial language use, depictions of emotional outbursts, kinds of unintentional slips, and so on. And so my goal kind of in my master's thesis is to see if I can mark these expressions of emotion and map it onto kind of the everyday feeling as a phenomenon that is kind of specific to the context of mid-20th century Kolkata. And all right, but that's kind of the main idea. I also realize that I'm running out of time, so I can leave anything else for questions.
Okay, thanks for a fabulous presentation, Caity. So now we have about 5 minutes for Q&A, and you're welcome to either type your question to the right or to raise your hand using the raise hand function in the dashboard. So yeah. Any questions? So if there are no questions, I'm just going to ask something here. My grandfather lived in Kolkata for a couple of years in the 60s, so I have a personal connection. But could you talk a little bit more about like cross-border interactions between West Bengal and Bangladesh today? And there's I've understood that this is a very firm border from my interaction with people from the area.
Yes, I mean, my understanding, and as far as my own research has kind of taken me, is that the border between West Bengal and Bangladesh is still, I mean, it remains to this day heavily guarded, and there are a number of kinds of long and bureaucratic processes that you have to engage in order to kind of cross the border. And on the other hand, there are kinds of political and religious tensions which become I think reified, especially in kind of the present geopolitical moment, particularly actually both in India and in Bangladesh. From a literary standpoint, however, this is what really interests me, is kind of the literary standpoint, because there is kind of this shared kind of social culture of book festivals called Boy Mela in Bangla. Which are, at least as far as Bangladesh is concerned, the biggest festival would occur right around the time of the onset of the Bangladesh language movement, like the anniversary that is celebrated every year on 21st February. So there is a 21st February book fair that is observed in Dhaka in particular, in Bangladesh, every year. And there are various book fairs which take on kind of a similar tone in Kolkata and also various parts of West Bengal. And this is something that I would be interested in working on the side. And it was actually kind of what inspired my master's research, is the presence of these kinds of book fairs and what appears to me to be kind of a tenuously shared literary culture that is, I would be interested to see if the kind of expression or the kind of ways that these book fairs operate and the kinds of literatures which come out of them share in kind of a common kind of cultural identity.
Thank you. We may have time for more questions. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. So Janet Feather, I'm going to read it aloud. Caity, can you recommend an author or book, historical or otherwise, that you feel particularly well describes this region and its literary culture and identity? Very good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I mean, I know a few examples in Bangla. There is in particular this one that I am currently using for my master's thesis, but yeah, the issue is that it's in Bengali. And this is part of the reason why I'm really interested in this line of research, because I find that particularly when, looking into kind of the history of short story magazines and really short stories in circulation in Bengal in particular, there's not a ton of research that has been done in English language aside from some articles and book chapters. So I have a couple books that I could give you, or edited volumes that I could give you, that don't necessarily focus on Bengal in particular. One very good author that I would probably begin with is Francisco Orsini, who is a book studies scholar and a recent professor emerita at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So I can send you that book or the link to that book in a bit.
So there's another question, and I think this is going to be the last. So it's from David Ralston. Can you say a bit how caste comes up in the stories?
This is something that I don't really work on, is kind of the matter of caste. However, there is a very long kind of political history of dealing with caste issues that informed these movements. And I will say that I think one of the markers of these kinds of movements, which occurred in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, is that despite many of the kind of more well-named authors who come from this period, kind of being front and center in characterizing this period, the real thing, one of the things which marks kind of the 50s to the 70s from the 30s and 40s and the progressive writers movement is kind of this very keen awareness of one's class privilege in drafting these literatures. I will say one of the really nice things about the short story book format is that it kind of differs from, say, the literary movements which were occurring kind of contemporaneously in Delhi, in that there was, kind of this circulatory means by which people from various kinds of social classes could participate in not only the production of these magazines, but also the circulation of these magazines.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Our second presentation is from Lindsey Quint. Lindsey is a dual degree student pursuing the Chinese studies, specializing within MIRS, as well as a master's in public policy from the Ford School. Her work in MIRS has centered on US-China subnational relations and Chinese renewable energy policy. And after graduating this spring, she intends to work on US-China economic development policy at the state level. Lindsey is a two-time FLAS Fellow and a recipient of the David He and Isabel Sun Fellowship. Additionally, Lindsey has served as a MIRS graduate student assistant for the past 3 years, contributing significant leadership and positive development for the MIRS program. Please join me in welcoming Lindsey for her talk, Forging Connections Amid Conflict, the Pivotal Role of NGOs in Fortifying US-China Relations Amidst a Global Uncertainty.
Hello, everyone. As Per said, my name is Lindsey Quint, and I am a third-year dual degree student in Chinese Studies and Public Policy. My research focuses on US-China relations at the subnational level, meaning the diplomacy that occurs between China and state-level governments in the United States. I have also spent a large portion of this year researching the development of anti-Chinese sentiment that we see at the state level in response to investment from Chinese companies. These interests have shaped my desire to continue to work in the subnational landscape post-graduation, with the goal to help local government offices craft policy on how to engage with China. And foundational in my pursuit of this was the practicum I completed during the summer of 2023 at the National Committee on US-China Relations. Next slide. First, I am briefly going to clarify what a practicum entails to provide a better understanding of how this option was applicable to my future goals. A practicum is an opportunity that is embedded within the MIRS curriculum that allows students to apply their academic learnings in a professional setting. This process entails obtaining an internship, followed by documenting and analyzing these experiences through 3 reports and a policy brief. It serves as a conduit between academic study and real-world practice, and it's designed to better prepare students for professional opportunities if that is the route that they are looking to pursue at MIRS. Why did I choose the practicum path? My aim was pretty clear from my early days in the program. I had decided early on that I didn't want to pursue a PhD, and I knew that it was really essential for me to kind of gather the professional experience needed to get a job post-graduation. And MIRS offers that route, and that's why I pursued it. Next slide. In the initial stages of my search for internships, I found myself grappling with a considerable hesitation towards applying for federal positions. Oftentimes, when you do work on US-China relations, a lot of this work is in Washington, D.C., and it is with think tanks and the federal government. And I personally, my intention was not merely to engage with an organization or a government entity focused on just policy research, but to do work that reflected a genuine appreciation for Chinese cultural heritage, language, and history. This desire stemmed from a conviction that understanding these elements is crucial for fostering meaningful dialogue and cooperation between the 2 nations. This led me to apply to the National Committee on US-China Relations, an NGO known for its work at the intersection of US-China relations and public education. They have really excellent programs. They do Track 2 dialogue work. They provide a lot of funding and support to professors who are interested in learning more about China. They send academic trips to China. And I applied, interviewed, and luckily received an internship offer for their summer 2023 cohort. Next slide. I worked for 3 different teams, with one of them being the subnational team. The subnational team provides resources to local government offices at the state level. In working on this team, I had the opportunity to take the lead in organizing a closed-door event, closed-door practicum for government officials. My task involved conducting in-depth research on key issues affecting local governments in their relations with China. This groundwork led to the planning of a practicum aimed at providing local governments with resources on how to approach new federal legislation mandating forced divestment from foreign entities, particularly China. The process of organizing this event prompted me to explore the way politicians at the state level talk about China, particularly when the potential economic gains from China are at odds with negative sentiments on China. For example, there are a lot of instances, not a lot, but there are some instances within the United States where Chinese companies are developing electric vehicle battery manufacturing plants. And there's a lot of public sentiment that opposes this investment. However, at the state government level, it's really difficult to make these decisions because you have constituents you have to reflect in your policy decision makings. But these Chinese investments also provide immense job opportunities and economic growth for your state. Next slide. I also worked on the China and the Hill newsletter. I've included an example of one of the first ones that I worked on to the right. This role presented me with the challenge of producing the newsletter. So this entailed content editing, formatting, proposing the lead package. I was reading 50 to 70 articles a week on current events related to China, and probably will be the most educated I will be in my life on Chinese current events. 50 to 70 articles is quite the undertaking, a great undertaking, but very, very substantial. And perhaps the most significant lesson within this team was learning how to receive feedback. There is a substantial difference between academic feedback, which is often structured around theoretical improvement and intellectual exploration, whereas professional feedback is more directly focused on practical outcomes, efficiency, and immediate applicability to the work. This shift in perspective was crucial for me, teaching the importance of adaptability and resilience in my professional development. It underscored the reality that feedback in a work setting is largely about contributing effectively to a team and meeting organizational objectives, whereas in an academic setting, this feedback is between you and the professor. So it's more constrained in how you should approach changes to your writing. Next slide. The final team I collaborated with was the Track 2 Dialogues team, focusing specifically on climate finance. For those who don't know, Track 2 dialogues are dialogues that occur below the government level and often involve maybe business heads, NGOs, other organizations that deal with diplomacy. This experience demonstrated how engagement continues across various levels beyond formal diplomatic channels, especially in the realm of NGOs. Track 2 dialogues can serve as an avenue in which transformative changes in federal policy can be achieved. And in the case of this climate finance Track 2 dialogue, while conversations were stalled at the federal government in regards to collaboration on climate finance, this Track 2 dialogue really enabled dialogue to continue. And oftentimes policy change can be implemented from a bottom-up approach, in that governments will experience pressure from these local organizations or NGOs and shift how they approach it, allowing movement and relations to improve. I want to really stress within the context of this team how important the MIRS program was. The MIRS program gave me the flexibility to take courses related to renewable energy and technology, which was really, really vital to my understanding of this dialogue, as well as the information that I was able to take away from it. All right, next slide. My second to last slide is about the travel that I was able to take to New York City. LRCCS provided me with the funding to go do work in person for 3 days. The majority of my internship had been done remotely. And the funding that was provided for this was really essential in the development of the relationships I had, as well as networking. A lot of the people that I got to meet in person, I still talk to now and have represented excellent resources for me in my pursuit of jobs post-graduation. Next slide. All right, this slide is a little bit of an homage to my time at Michigan. So in future goals, I am interested in pursuing economic development at the state level. So I have been applying a lot to governor's office positions that help facilitate foreign investment in local economies, with a particular focus on renewable energy. I have some photos up here of when I graduated from undergrad and got into Michigan, and my first trip to Michigan. And the practicum route really helped me solidify what I wanted to do post-graduation. My interests were really broad when I entered the program, and the practicum route really gave me the ability to refine what I wanted to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, and especially for talking a little bit about the practicum. I also saw that Jan Barrios was on a couple of places, and she's the chairperson of this organization you worked for, and also is an alumnus of our Japanese studies program.
Yep.
So she is in a way part of the MIRS family. Are there any questions or comments? You can type them in the comment field, or you can raise your hand using the raise your hand function. I always have an icebreaker. Maybe I can, yeah. So you talked about track. Oh, here we go. What brings you to Chinese studies? It's from Echo Shi.
This is the good question. My mom worked in China when I was growing up, and by proxy, I enrolled in Chinese language classes, and I got to undergrad, and there was still a Chinese language requirement, and I kept taking courses, and I think I took maybe a modern Chinese history course, I think it was, with Timothy Weston at CU Boulder, and I always say that that was kind of the moment that I found my first love. Taking that class really changed how I viewed China, and I fell in love from there. And 7 years later, we're still doing it. So
Great. So Tina is asking a question. Could you talk a little bit more about how the work you did in your internship is impacting your job search and the types of roles you are seeking now?
yeah. So I would say the most impactful team that I worked on was a subnational team, because I got to engage with local government officials, and it provided me with a lot of insight into the different departments that you can work at that I otherwise would not have been exposed to. So I would say that kind of drove pursuing subnational relations in a more tailored way. And then the experiences in writing memos and refining my writing, in presenting, have really aided in, one, bolstering my resume, which is a very large contributor to finding a job, and also expanded my education in a lot of ways. A master's program is a wonderful way to really grow your breadth of knowledge, but within a professional setting, you learn and kind of explore in a different way. And it gave me the research skills to tailor it more towards professional work in contrast to academic work.
Thank you. And we have a question from David. What surprised you most about your time in the program?
Me most. I would say maybe I would break it down into two things. I don't know that I would say surprised, but I would say the most impactful part of the program was the support that I received for everything that I wanted to do. The faculty, the academic advisors, Charlie and Tina, Pear, Dr. Gallagher, who's the director of the II, really stood behind me in my interests. And so it really furthered my research and my desire to pursue my second degree. And then I would just say my resiliency. When you're in the middle of taking quant courses at the Ford School and you're learning about statistics and you haven't taken a math class in 3 or 4 years, your ability to pull through is shocking. I don't want to say shocking, but surprising.
We have, I think, maybe the last question and typed, it's Echo Shi with a follow-up. What are the biggest fun and challenge you do to do Chinese studies for you? Whether and how does Chinese studies change you?
These are excellent questions. Best fun of Chinese studies. I would say the best part about studying Chinese here is the people that you get to meet and the connections that you get to make. It's really wonderful to meet students from China or from the United States studying really different topics from you. It makes learning really interesting. You really get to build on what your peers are doing and support and collaborate with everyone. So I would say that's the most fun. The challenging part, say the language, maybe. I would love to reach the point where Chinese feels easy, but we just have not hit that part yet. I would say the language is maybe the most difficult. Or maybe when relations aren't super positive, that makes studying really difficult. It really limits travel opportunities. And then how has Chinese studies changed me? I feel like in every way possible. I don't know that I have a good answer to this question. I'd have to think about this a little longer. So I'm gonna decline to comment in this case because I think there are too many ways to list.
Okay, so thank you very much, Lindsey. I just wanted to say that in terms of asking questions, you're more than welcome to type them while the person is speaking, and then I can read them aloud after, in case you want to catch your questions as they come in the moment, and you can send them to me directly, or you can type them to everyone. So I'm going to move on. Our next speaker is Cecilia Solís-Barroso. Cecilia is pursuing a graduate certificate in Latin American and Caribbean Studies through the II and is a fourth-year PhD candidate in linguistics. Cecilia's research include linguistics, indigenous languages, and bilingualism. Cecilia has been recognized as a 3-time FLAS Fellow and the recipient of multiple awards, including the Research for Indigenous Social Action and Equity, RISE Research Grant, and the Tinkerfield Research Grant, among others. Please join me in welcoming Cecilia for a talk entitled A Generational Analysis of Variation and Change in the Noun Phrase Morphosyntax of Huasteca Nahuatl. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, it's pretty good. Thank you. And hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and talk about my research. This is going to be the foundation for my dissertation. In the introduction, as the speaker mentioned, I've received a lot of support from the LAX Center here at the university. So that has funded a lot of the field work that I'm going to be talking about today. So next slide. Great. All right, so to begin this conversation, I want to talk about language change and variation. And one of the things that we know about language is that it's constantly changing and evolving, right? And this happens in every single language. And it can be the result of many factors. So for example, the needs of speakers and the environment can change. And we can think about, all the words, all the phrases and expressions we have related to social media, to technology, that we didn't have 50 years ago, right? We also know that things like social stratification, so people from different social groups are going to talk differently. And I kind of invite you, right, to reflect on the way that you speak in comparison to the way that your parents speak or your grandparents and even your siblings. And if we really look closely, sometimes we find differences there, right, within a single family. And importantly for this research, we also know that language contact and multilingualism can drive language change. So next slide. In this specific project that I'm working on, and as I said, it's going to be for my dissertation, I specifically look at language change in Nahuatl. And as I mentioned, this is an indigenous language spoken in Mexico, and it has about 1.5 million of speakers. So it's pretty much the most widely spoken indigenous language in Mexico and probably Latin America as a whole. Here I have this map kind of showing you the areas where the bigger pockets of speakers are in Mexico. And I specifically look at the speakers in the purple region, so where it's labeled Huasteca. Okay, next slide. Great. So importantly, we know from research and from, a lot of information that is put out there that Nahuatl primarily exists in a multilingual context. So according to this data that we have from 2022, we know that 87.2% of speakers of indigenous languages in Mexico also speak Spanish or another indigenous language, right? So they have very, very high rates of multilingualism. And unfortunately, we also know that Nahuatl is an endangered language. So there are approximately 30 varieties of Nahuatl, and all of them are on sort of like the endangered scale. that we use to categorize languages. So taken together, these two facts, it really brings about the importance of documenting and understanding the language changes happening now, because it's going to keep evolving, and we want to be able to have records of that. Next slide. Great. So when we study languages, if we really think about it, language is a very it's composed of many different parts, right? So we can study the phonology, we can study the vocabulary. In my specific case, I focus on morphosyntax and only looking at nouns. So very generally, morphosyntax is the study of word order and sentence formation, all right? And I have an example in the next slide. Great. So for example, we can take this word tonantzin, which is a Nahuatl word, which roughly translates to our dear mother in English. Next slide. And although it just appears like a single word, if we actually break down the different components of it, the separate units, right, we can see that it's actually a bit more complex than just one single word. So for example, here we have tonantzin, which is made up of to, which is something like a prefix. We have nan, which would be considered the root of the word. And then we have tsin, which would be considered the suffix. Right, so I'm calling them prefix and suffix because that's typically how we learn about this in classes. But in linguistics, we typically call these like morphemes. All right, next slide. Great. So there has been previous research done on morphosyntactic change, but one of the things that I've noticed in the literature is that a lot of the focus comes from varieties in central Mexico. So in central Mexico, we have the capital of the city. So, we just know that some varieties, some pockets of speakers are easier to access than others. And in this previous research, people have started to notice some changes, right? So some suffixes are being kind of simplified. Some criteria for using a type of suffix or a type of noun is changing. I won't go into the details, but I just want you to remember that they are noticing morphosyntactic change in some varieties of the language. Next slide. Great. And in this particular work for my dissertation, what I do is explore nominal morphology, right? So again, it's kind of the structure of nouns. And in my research questions, I ask things like, what is the inventory of nominal morphology? So like what types of suffixes are being used, what type of prefixes, as well as looking at whether there's generational differences, right? Where the people from 3 generations have notable differences. Next slide. Great. And in order to do this, I conduct fieldwork in Chicontepec, Veracruz. So that's the little red dot that you see in the map. And, in this area, most people still speak Nahuatl. And during this fieldwork, what I do is that I sit down with participants for about an hour and I record spoken data in Nahuatl. At the end of my dissertation, I plan to have about 40 participants that are native speakers of Nahuatl. And importantly, they will be of various ages and linguistic experiences, in order to try to capture the diversity that naturally exists in all languages. Next slide. Okay, so once that data is collected, typically what happens for this type of work is that the first step would be to transcribe all those audios into written data. The second part is to identify all the nouns and the nominal morphemes that I want to study, and then I code it, right? So I say, is it a prefix? Is it a suffix? What meaning is it adding to the word, as well as what language it's in? And then I do some analysis to try to find patterns that might give us some information about generational differences. Next slide. Great. So in this particular case, right, I've started to do some of this with some of the previous funding that I've received from LACS. And very generally, I'm going to talk really fast about some pilot data that I have based on preliminary observations that I've done from interviews with 6 speakers of the language. In total, I am talking about like 3 hours of speech, and I found approximately 504 nouns. And from the 6 speakers, I was able to interview 2 people from the younger generation, 2 from the middle generation, and 2 from the older generation. Okay, next slide. Awesome. And as you can see here in this table, the type of thing that I do, right, is if I notice if the root is of Nahuatl origin word, is it a Spanish origin word, and like how complex is the morphology or all the suffixes and prefixes going on. Next slide. Great. And here, so some preliminary observations is that I am indeed finding morphosyntactic variation. It does seem to be kind of like observable, very similar to the previous work that has been done in the language. And I guess I'll just mention this as a final point. The generational differences that I'm trying to look for are not blatantly obvious. So if I go back to the table and I delete the information about their generation, there are no clear patterns as to what's going on. All right, so it is kind of difficult to draw conclusions from a limited data, but some of the next step will include to collect more data and write a whole dissertation on the topic. So I'll have more on this. Next slide. All right, and I'll finally conclude by reminding you all I'm looking at nominal morphology in Huasteca Nahuatl as a way to document the language as well as kind of test theories of morphosyntactic change. And some takeaways that I hope you remember from this presentation is that language change and variation exist in all languages, and it's perfectly normal. We also need to keep exploring the role of multilingualism in language change and language generally, especially as we become an increasingly multilingual world. And in Mexico, there are many, many indigenous languages like Nahuatl, and we obviously need to keep increasing their documentation and visibility. Next slide. There's a whole team behind this work that I need to thank. Here, I just list some of the people. As well as I mentioned, I have been very fortunate to receive so much support from the Latin American and Caribbean Studies Center. So I'm forever grateful. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. This was really fascinating. And I know a lot of people who join MIRS have a strong interest in language. And some of us are also bilingual and maybe not me, but from birth. And so we have 5 minutes for questions. So anyone wants to start? No? Okay. I have a very detailed question. I noticed that one of your examples was that a plural marker was attached to inanimate objects. And
Yes.
I noticed from Chinese that the only time when you do add plural markers is when you have animate. So people can only have plurals. Is this something that's in Nahuatl? And also, is this kind of an infiltration of plural from Spanish?
Yeah, no, so in Nahuatl, typically only animate nouns can be pluralized. You can still do like 2 houses, but it would be something like 2 house. But one of the things that we're seeing is that now inanimate objects are also being pluralized. So this might be kind of an effect from Spanish, because in Spanish, animate, inanimate nouns can be pluralized.
Okay. So here we have a question from Samatota. Are there initiatives being undertaken in Mexico to preserve and promote indigenous languages?
Yes. So I think I have to say that unfortunately, it's been very conditioned by the government in place. And currently, I know that they started, some government programs to try to like promote or train speakers of the language to teach their indigenous languages to their communities and people in Mexico broadly. So there are, for sure. But yes, unfortunately, we do see a lot of like change depending on who's in power.
Thank you. We still have time. We still have time for questions about Nahuatl and its variety in Huasteca. David Rolston asks, what kind of problems did you encounter in the process of transcribing oral recordings? Are there ways to independently check your level of accuracy a second set of ears?
Yes. So I guess one of the things now that, we have AI. So there's a lot of like services that are like offering translation. Unfortunately, they're really good for English. They're somewhat good for Spanish, and they're non-existent for Nahuatl. So I wish I had something that could help. So the transcriptions have to be done like by a human by hand. And yes, typically what I do is I work with community members as well as kind of like research collaborators, research assistants. They do some of the transcription and then we check them together just to exactly give kind of like at least two sets of eyes and ears, yes, on this in this process.
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, as a sinologist, I'm interested in Chinese dialects, and this is a constant problem, how you write them down. So that was a question close to my thinking. Yeah, we still have maybe a minute and a half for questions if someone wants to follow up on any of the points that have been raised. In any case, I learned a lot. It was a crash course in Central American linguistics. Okay, I mean, if there aren't any questions, feel free to communicate directly afterwards. So I think we should move on to the next presenter, and I believe it's can read from so our final speaker today. Our next we will hear from sorry. Next, we're going to hear from Yinger Yang, a first-year student in the Chinese studies specialization. Yinger's research interest includes sociology of education policy, and inequality. She is a recipient of the Liebesol Rogel Endowment Fellowship, as well as a 2024 AAS Conference Special Fellowship. Please join me in welcoming Yinger for a talk titled Pioneers in Startup Universities, Educational Decision as Ethical Projects Among Uncertainties.
So, hi everyone. Today I would love to share the project that I have been working on in the last year, since last year. So it's on how Chinese families make sense and make the decision of enrolling their children in Sino-Foreign joint venture university. A newly emerged higher education that have uncertain educational return in mainland China. So please go to the next slide. Yeah, great. So Sino-Foreign joint venture university in mainland China is a newly emerged higher education in mainland China in the past 2 decades. However, this form of education is embedded in lots of uncertainty. First, university like New York University, Shanghai, or Duke Kunshan University, they actually fall outside China's mainstream university hierarchy. So actually, you could not tell whether their degree are domestic or international, and there's lots of ambiguity on their degree. Also, sometimes they are not accounted in the global ranking of higher education, such as QS ranking or US New ranking. Since they have just been some cohorts of graduation students, so actually graduates from this university usually face skepticism from the employers. And most importantly, this transnational partnership like between China and the US or China and mainland China and Hong Kong is constantly threatened by geopolitical tension between the education exporter and the host countries. So my questions when I'm doing this research project is that why this startup joint venture university, a choice with uncertain returns, become attractive from Chinese families? And how did parents and students cope with uncertainty I have mentioned after their enrollment? So please go to the next one. So I'm examining people's educational decisions using qualitative method, a combination of participant observations and interviewing. The rationale behind that is that even though quantitative method is really a trend in today's social science research, I believe that qualitative method can better capture people's sense-making process, especially when you are interviewing people, when people, student parents tell their stories of decision-making, you can know what kinds of identity they want to pursue through choosing these kinds of education and basing what kinds of cultural materials they are making this decision. That's why I choose to use qualitative method to finish my project. Please go to the next slide. So this is to answer the above research questions. Actually, I conducted fieldwork in 5 coastal cities in mainland China. I interviewed 14A senior junior students and 26 parents mainly from 3 joint venture universities. I also interned in one of the field sites to get a better insider views of how this decision-making process work. Meanwhile, I also participated in recruitments and admissions into metropolitan cities in Guangzhou and Shanghai. Please go to the next slide. So what I found after conducting my fieldwork and interview is that sure, there are instrumental consideration behind parents and students' decision making of choosing to be a pioneers in this style university. For example, due to the low admission bar of this relatively low admission bar in this university, some family perceive it as a strategy to downscale the risk in failing the centralized exam, which is Gaokao in China. And some family perceive it as a stepping stone for overseas prestigious graduate programs. Also, this university seems its curriculum combine both Chinese content or British and American content. Some family perceive it offers global job prospect while maintaining student domestic connection. However, I found that this educational decision-making process can not only explained by this instrumental consideration. This is because these futures are too far-reaching for a senior and junior student, because the senior junior student actually they do not have a very clear idea what they will do in the future. However, this family, they are constantly threatened by the uncertainties that I have mentioned in previous slide, because they are stuck in a liminal space between Chinese mainstream education system and an authentic international education system. So to cope with these uncertainty, anxiety, and fear, they use their past experience in the exam-oriented education to clarify their choice. For example, they perceive international education as a symbol for autonomy. Meanwhile, students and parents, they will engage in imaginative practice of everyday self-transformation in international education. So they no longer view eyes on the labor market returns or graduate school applications that happens 1 or 3 years later. Finally, they are also trying to pursue to self-cultivate an identity of being a Chinese, but with a global vision. So with all these ethical rationales or cognitive strategy, they are trying to navigate all this uncertainty brought by this newly emerged education. Please go to the next slide. So actually, my project benefited a lot from my experience at the MIRS program. So first, by taking lots of curriculums in the MIRS programs, actually, I kind of expanded my research interest. So when I coming to the program, actually, I do not know how to situate myself, whether I situated myself in educational studies, sociology, or anthropology, or public policy. So in MIRS, I audit or took lots of courses from different departments. And in each courses, I try to write a final essay that related to my interests. So for example, I audit courses in the anthropology department, also took courses in the sociology department. So I also write essays that contributed to my ongoing research projects. Meanwhile, I'm also very interested in some of the cutting edge research methods in the educational studies. So I also took the method sequence in other departments, which is very, very beneficial. Meanwhile, I would say that especially Chinese study center, they have new lecture series where they invited renowned guest speaker to have a deep conversation with students and faculty. And I got lots of insights from my project during this lecture series. Also, also as a MIRS student, you can go to listen to the seminars offered by other departments. So I will go to the seminars offered by the School of Public Policy and Sociology. And I think the faculty, is in this seminar, you can build a connection with the professor at University of Michigan, and you can also get lots of feedback on your ongoing project. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much, and thanks for the shout out for the colloquium, the new lecture series. So yeah, do we have any questions coming in? Okay, it's Selena, I believe.
Yeah, so I will mute myself. So thank you for your presentation, and I think it's a really promising project. And actually, I'm a senior majoring in global China studies from NYU Shanghai, so I'm kind of related to your topic. And I noticed your profile on the website, like you are also graduate from one of the joint venture university in China. So, and personally, I would say like it's really related to my life. As you know, like global China studies major is a really small cohort. And for example, in class of 2024, we only have 7 students, and 5 of them are Chinese. And most of our friends may be curious, like why you choose this major and why your parents agree you will choose this major, because they think it's not a really promising career to have a like competitive job in China. So I'm kind of curious, like it's not a kind of academic focus question, but I'm just curious about your personal experience, like what motivated you to choose this undergraduate experience in this joint venture university, and also how your experience have influenced your life in MIRS. Thanks.
Okay. So actually, by that time, my family tried to use joint venture university to downscale the risk in Gaokao. So by that time, I could not get in the top most prestigious university in mainland China. And my parents, they think they are also very open-minded, and they also have the illusion that international education is probably somehow better than exam-oriented education. So they just sent me to one of the joint venture university in mainland China. So what I learned from my joint venture experience is that it's very hard to tell, I would say. When I pursuing my degree in joint venture institute, actually I majored in translation. But I think the joint venture university, which is UHK Shenzhen, actually provides me lots of opportunity to do research project in social science. And I'm especially interested in education. So I did some research related to joint venture education. That's how I developed my research interest of sociology of education. So, and by that time, I'm also seeking a master program in the US that can guide me to a PhD program in the US, or other professional job opportunity about educational related evaluation. So I applied for the MIRS program, and then I get in. So I would say that since I'm from joint venture university, I'm doing research related to joint venture. I think that this undergraduate experience has a great influence on me. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? I couldn't help thinking myself about the fact that many universities in China started as kind of joint ventures. Like we have St. John's University in the American, like the international concession. We have Aurora University in French concession. We have the Harvard Yenching, or the Yenching University in Beijing. And how does that history and these legacies inform current decisions about joint venture universities? Do these universities figure at all, or are they seen as out of scope?
I think there are a bunch of like university of joint venture just after the founding of Republic of China, but later there is a reform that cancel this joint venture university. What they did, they just take the department of this joint venture university and integrating them into like public university in mainland China. I do not remember the exact time how it happened, but I think it's mainly in the 14th or 15th when they restructured the overall educational system of China. And nowadays, joint venture institute, actually, they kind of emerge after the reform and opening up. So before the reform and opening up, private institute, they are not allowed to engage in the like educational sector. So after the reform and opening up, there are a bunch of laws that allow private investor, especially foreign investor, to cooperate with an institute in mainland China to form these kinds of education. Also, this kind of education is related to some of China's geopolitical projects, such as the Belt and Silk Road. So China's joint venture is also expanding to Southeast Asia, and there's lots of interesting topics there. So yeah, great.
Thank you. So this was a very comprehensive presentation about something that we in the China field talk about a lot. So I'm going to move on to the next and the final speaker. Just let me reset my watch here. So our final speaker today is Anawar Ali, a first-year student in the Middle Eastern and North African specialization. Anawar's specialization research interests include archaeology, community archaeology, and both the modern and ancient history of the MENA region. He's a recipient of MIRS and C. Menas fellowships, as well as the 2023-24 Arab Alumni Scholarship Fund recipient from the Rackham Graduate School. Please join me in welcoming Anawar for his talk, Decolonizing Archaeological Practices in Sudan, Museums, Identity, and the Local Community.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the kind introduction. Well, today I invite you to join me to know my research and explore the transformative approach to decolonizing archaeological practices in Sudan, focusing on museum identity and the empowerment of local communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's go next slide. Yeah, so historically, archaeology has been a tool of extraction with artifact removed and displaced, countering to the colonial legacy that has long overshadowed the discipline from the 18th century throughout the early 21st century. Countless archaeological treasures were uprooted from their origins, finding new homes in Western museum and private collections. Next slide, please. So this process not only stripped countries of their cultural heritage, but also reinforced colonial ideologies. However, the tide is turning. A growing movement within archaeology seeks to rectify this past injustice, aiming to make the field more equitable and inclusive. So the definition of, as you can see here, like this is exactly what happened in Sudan, the distribution of artifacts in different museums in the world. So the definition of the problem, the crux of my research lies in addressing the colonial legacies embedded within the archaeological practices and museum displays. So despite the impact of colonialism persists influencing how archaeology conducted and how history is told. Next slide. So my exploration begins with the critical look at George Reisner works in Sudan. He's an archaeologist, an American archaeologist, which despite his like methodological acclamation, his work was impaired by colonial biases and racism. Next slide. So let's go one more slide. So, and this, like the colonial work or influences remain in the memory of in the collective memory of society, and that is like clear and obvious in the poetry of this person, Muhammad Hassan Salim Hamid. He clearly described how the community felt during the colonial era. Next slide. So here you can see, yeah, okay, great. So this historical context set the stage for my main question, which is how to decolonize archaeological practices and museum narrative to empower local communities in Sudan. So I also have other guiding question, which is like, what alternative method could be employed to decolonize archaeology and engage local community in Sudan, and in shaping shaping goals and interpretation of archaeological research, and to what extent museums continue to perpetuate colonial approach towards culture. How can we move towards decolonization, and how communities can produce their own narrative of heritage free from Western imposed concepts. Next slide. So my idea of like to move around, like to move toward decolonization, is to conduct interviews with museum to understand the narrative surrounding displayed artifacts, and focusing on the origin of these artifacts and the voices and the narrative and their stories that has been told now, as opposed to what the community think. So for the purpose of this research, I intend to get internship into the Museum of Fine Art in Boston and translate and make accessible archaeological archive for Arabic-speaking scholars. Next slide. Yeah, this probably was another next slide. Those are like the objects which are lies in the museum, part of them now. So how did I get inspired to pursue this research? So in 2013, University of Michigan began working at Al-Kuru. Al-Kuru is a place where I grew up. Like making, and then they, like the university started making a significant departure from the past archaeological practices. So led by the University of Michigan in collaboration with the government and local community, this project set to rewrite the narrative of archaeological exploration in Sudan, with the emphasis on collaboration, education, and mutual respect. The University of Michigan approach was distinctively inclusive, contrasting sharply with the historical expedition. Unlike like the previous expedition, they set their own tents and houses away from the town, like being alienating themselves. But the University of Michigan, like they stayed in the village, and they engaged in daily conversations with community members. This strategy helped like to dispel the fears of cultural appropriation, building the foundation of trust that grew stronger with each season. Another important aspect of the University of Michigan project was its focus on education and heritage preservation. Next slide. So recognizing the lack of local historical, lack of knowledge among like historical aspect among local youth, young generations, we collaborated with school teachers to develop and implement a curriculum that brought a rich history of the Kush Kingdom to the life of primary school students. Next slide. So the curriculum is available both in Arabic language and English language. Arabic language is because Sudan is like Arabic language speaking country. Not only informed, but also inspired students as evidence by their excellent performance, like highlighted what's very obvious and clear in their curiosity about the cultural heritage. Next slide. So further enriching our educational outreach, me as collaboration with the university and the local community. So we initiated a kids book that next slide. Kids storybook. So this endeavor aimed to fill the gap of local literature on stories rooted in Nubian heritage, contributing to a stronger sense of identity and pride among like young readers. Next slide. So the culmination of our effort with the University of Michigan and planning like the development of community heritage center, it's designed to be a space for learning and cultural exchange. The center also aimed to showcase both archaeological and intangible heritage of Al-Kuru, serving as a testament of power of collaboration in heritage preservation. That will be all, but I really wanted to, at this point, that like getting accepted to this program, there are lots of chances and resources that you can use to of course expand and improve your research. And you can get also, and this is a point who was mentioned, I think last year in Rosa's presentation, which is you get this chance to attend lots of events and to write about them in different regions in the world, and this really helped to shape like your ideas, especially when you write when you write your own reflection about the speaker's idea, which is part of the 600 class colloquium. That's really helped a lot to foster ideas and yeah, and to make connections with the world, because everything is connected also. That will be all.
Okay, so thank you so much. Thanks for mentioning the colloquium again. So do we have any questions? Please type your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Sure, there are questions. We have about maybe 5 minutes. So Ekoshi asks, could you please share how you raise your amazing academic research question?
It's an interesting question, but I'm not sure if I understand exactly like how did I come up to this? Yeah, well, I was of course inspired by by the work with the University of Michigan, but then also during this, so growing up, I grew up in this town where it was first excavated in 1919, 1918. And then after that, nothing happened in that site. That site was the Royal Cemetery of Kush Kingdom. There are lots of tombs. It's an interesting place. But then there are empty tombs, and the only thing we knew growing up is that lots of artifacts were taken from here to Europe and the United States, but then no one's have seen them because it was like forbidden to get closer to the tents where they keep stuff. And then after that, growing up, I learned and I knew that they exist, but of course never seen them. So working toward decolonization like it started to become a really interesting thing because it's like you get to connect the culture back again to its roots.
Okay, thank you. All right, so any more questions to Anawar? I didn't know that we had this community archaeology. Thanks for learning more about our institution. I've been working a little bit with archaeologists active in Mongolia myself, so that's my very peripheral involvement. So, I mean, Tina has a question.
Thank you, Anawar, for sharing about your research with us. Can you talk a little bit about what this looks like going forward? What do you plan for kind of the next steps of the research or your research agenda, or where do you see this kind of taking you personally in the future? I think you shared a lot about outcomes in the work that's already been done, but I'm just curious kind of next steps for this kind of a project.
Yeah, so I'm writing my like MA thesis about this, and I had to coming here to the University of Michigan, I got a chance to take classes, like take a deeper look to the literature of decolonization and community archaeology. Everyone defines it in a different way. There are different ways to, of course, to engage with community because every community is different. But then there are some aspects which were not like emphasized enough, I guess. One of them, which is like the sustainability of engaging with communities, because some archaeologists would go to a place and then they would engage, but it's not sustainable. So you do a work for a certain amount of time and that's it. And that most of the time is not beneficial for communities as much as it is for archaeologists and scholars. And so my idea is to like put this emphasis on sustainability and to provide communities with a chance to actually give their own explanation, let's say, or their own ideas of their past and so on. I'm interested at this point on working like within community archaeology, and I looking forward to get a chance to contribute in a big workshop that there are within it, there are lots of archaeologists from different places, so I can get lots of different experiences. Hopefully I will get a PhD program also, and I can go on in this along with other archaeological interests.
Thank you. So we have two remaining questions, and one of them is about what kind to all the speakers, but I don't think we will have time to address that because that would involve letting every single speaker speak. So if that is okay, Echo, I will move on to Caity's question to make that the final question, and then we can wrap up. So Caity's question is, how has work with the museums here at the U of M sharpened your research skills?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so I am taking 2 courses, and I think taking my perspective in community archaeology, also combine it with those courses that works closely with museum, adds really a value not only to me but to museums also, because then I see things from my own angle. So I guess it's a good chance for me to know how like museum systems work, but also how could possibly, because we have the Heritage Center, how could we possibly make our own version of museum, which is, I mean, now there are community museums also. Yeah, so maybe in the future can do that.
Okay, so thank you so much. I'm gonna wrap up. So that concludes our presentations. If you want to linger on afterwards, you're more than welcome to do so. I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today for the II Graduate Student Lightning Talks. I hope you enjoyed learning about the interesting work our students have undertaken. I know I'm always amazed to hear how bright and accomplished they truly are. Many thanks to each of the speakers for sharing about their experiences. Please join me in one last virtual round of applause. You can use the emoticon function if you want to. Thank you, and that concludes our event. Visiting students, I know there may be many more student items of your itineraries. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of your preview experience. Please let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a wonderful weekend, everyone. So, big round of applause for everyone. So yeah, again, if someone wants to linger on and talk about support, as Tina suggested, you can hang on afterwards, but we conclude the recording now.